Hey y'all, we here at graveyarddance.com hope you're having a wonderful week out there. If you're into spooky ghost stories that come heavily verified with a lot of credible witnesses, this will be a story I'm sure you'll love. If you enjoy our work, I hope you'll please take the time to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell for updates on all future videos. It just takes a second, but it means so much to the growth of our channel. Now, onto today's story. If you've ever had a fear of flying, you may want to pay close attention to this one. If you have a fear of ghosts, you may want to pay even closer attention. This is a story sure to give you goosebumps and chills and keep you up for hours at night wondering if you'll ever encounter something like this on your next flight. On a cold winter night on December 29, 1972 at JFK Airport in Queens, New York, the 176 passengers of Flight 401 and the 13 crew members boarded the flight for what should have been a normal flight to Miami, Florida, but it would turn out to be anything but normal. As the passengers settled into their seats and began to relax, the crew started to make their final preparations for takeoff. Little did they know what the night would have in store for them. The plane was a state-of-the-art jumbo jet called the Lucky TriStar that had all the luxuries of its time. That night it was being flown by a 30-year veteran pilot named Bob Loft, and his first officer is Albert Stockstill and his second officer is Donald Repo. A fourth person was in the cockpit that night as well. A man named Angelo Donadeo, who was on his way to Miami to start a new job as a pilot there. Everything seemed to be going smoothly for now, but that wouldn't be the case for long. As the plane was flying toward their final destination, the crew were going over their in-flight checklist and it came to the part of checking to see if the wheels for landing were down. According to the cabin lights, the rear wheels were, but the nose wheels were not. Without the wheels being down, there was no way to safely land the airplane. Loft tried over and over again to get the landing gear down, but there was no way to be certain it was. He called radio control for Miami and told them he would circle the airport a couple of times to try to figure out what the issue was. As they flew away from the airport and out toward the Everglades, the crew tried removing the bulb to see if that's what it was. As they did, they went up a couple thousand more feet in the air and put the plane on autopilot so they could work on their worrisome problem. This was a very serious issue that had to be fixed and fast. Before anyone knew what was going on, one of the crew mentioned that they were losing altitude, but before anyone knew what to do or how to react, Flight 401 crashed into the dark Everglades swamp, sending a huge fireball down the plane, killing many instantly. Many others were cast out into the dark swamp, some even still attached to their seats. Lucky for them, a man named Bob Marquez was out on his boat that night and helped save many of the 77 who survived the crash. The other 99 wasn't so lucky, including Bob Loft, who survived initially for a few moments, but died shortly after the crash, just as first officers Albert Stockstill and Donald Repo, who had entered the hellhole at the time of the crash, which was a small cubbyhole area underneath the cockpit. He had been down there trying to see if the front landing gear had been down when tragedy struck. Luckily for many, the plane didn't crash coming straight down. What actually happened was that when the third landing gear light didn't come on, the crew put the plane on autopilot, at 2,000 feet, but didn't realize they had knocked it off when they were reaching for the bulb when they pulled it out and tried cleaning it to put it back in. That single mistake set the aircraft at just a slight downward motion that they wouldn't have been able to feel. It was also so dark over the glades that they never saw the crash coming until it happened. After a thorough investigation, it was determined that the crash was caused over a $12 light bulb being faulty and pilot error for when Bob Loft had accidentally brushed the wheel of the plane with his knee, turning around to tell Donald Repo to crawl into the hellhole to check the landing gear. It wasn't entirely his fault though. The plane was a brand new type of aircraft and should have had a safety setting locking the wheel into place, so that never could have happened. Another thing was, the crew was never trained or told that something like this could happen. There was no way they could have known. To their credit, Eastern Airlines did their best to fully compensate the victims and their families and made drastic changes to not only the next aircrafts being built as well as the ones already made, but they also did a lot of improvements to the training of pilots, both experienced and new alike. That should have been the end of the story for Flight 401, but it wasn't. For the next few years, literally hundreds of Eastern Airlines employees began to see something that terrified them and something that the airlines did their best to keep out of the public's knowledge. If an employee was caught talking about what they saw, it usually got them sent to a psychiatrist or even fired. Still though, many came forward with their story. Flight 401 at the time of the crash had been brand new and many of the parts of it had been salvageable. They are also astronomically expensive, so putting the parts on planes that needed it seemed like a no-brainer. One of the planes was a plane called 318. Once receiving the donor parts, it took off for its flight. Two of the flight attendants had a very strange experience when they were preparing to serve the folks aboard the flight. The airplane had two levels and the lower level had a kitchen area and a space where crew could go down to relax and take breaks. One of them was upstairs when one took an elevator down to the lower level and for some reason got spooked, convinced someone was in there with her. She got in the elevator and went to the main level and nearly knocked over one of the other attendants in the process. As it turned out, another attendant had been down there a few minutes before. She had had the exact same terrifying experience. If that was all it was, one may chalk it up to nerves or maybe an overactive imagination, but the strange events were far from over. Just a short time later, that exact same plane was in Newark, New Jersey getting ready to fly to Miami when the senior flight attendant was checking tickets and counting heads to see that everyone who should be on the flight was. She wasn't expecting what was about to happen. She found the passenger who wasn't supposed to be there. A man sitting in first class in an Eastern Airlines captain's uniform. At first, she thought that he was just catching a ride to the next airport the way many do. There's a term for it called deadheading. You'll see how ironic that is in a second. As the flight attendant approached the captain to get his name so she could account for him, she saw that he was not reacting to her presence. She asked him a few times and again, nothing. Just a blank stare straight ahead. She was soon approached by another flight attendant who tried to help, but still, the captain stared straight ahead. The senior attendant finally decided that there was nothing more she could do but go find the captain who was about to fly the plane to come back and see if he could figure out the situation. So he came out of the cockpit and down the aisle to see what was going on. He looked at the strange passenger and asked for his name and still got no reply. As he got down on one knee and turned in a way where he could get a face-to-face visual, he nearly jumped out of his own skin, falling backwards. He shouted, "Oh my God! You're Bob Loft!" It was the pilot who had been flying Flight 401 and who had died in the swamp that night. Before anyone could react and while several passengers watched in horror, he simply vanished into thin air. Naturally, passengers and crew alike were scared to death. Many were crying and wanted to leave the plane, but the crew eventually calmed everyone down and searched the plane for the ghost passenger, but to no avail. As soon as they reached their destination, the senior flight attendant, the captain and the other attendant all filled out reports as to what happened, but Eastern Airlines did the best they could to shut them up, even destroying the reports and denying they were filed. Over the next few years, ghostly sightings and strange events would haunt Eastern Airlines flights daily, which scared the living heck out of both passengers and crew alike. But the kicker is, it was only on planes using the parts of Flight 401. If you remember some of my older videos, there was another story a lot like this, which was the story of James Dean's haunted sports car. If you haven't yet seen it, go to graveyarddance.com and click videos and scroll back. Anywho, over the next couple of years, all three of the pilots who died were seen on various flights and by many of the people who knew them very well, even Eastern Airlines executives. One particularly frightening event happened when one of the crew heard banging from the hellhole, again which is under the cockpit. He went down to check it out and didn't see a thing, that is till he started to come back up. He looked up and spotted Donald Repo, the one who was in the hellhole when it crashed. He vanished. There were several instances of other terrifying sightings of the ghost crew, but there was one time when they proved that they were not there to harm anyone. Before one of the flights aboard one of the haunted planes, Don Repo, the man who had been in the hellhole at the time of the initial accident, appeared to one of the flight crew telling him that there would be a malfunction in one of the engines if the plane took off. He then simply vanished into thin air. They did a quick inspection to see if the ghost pilot was telling the truth, and sure enough, there was a major problem with that engine that would have most likely ended in disaster. Despite the ghost crew being helping in that instance, it was becoming too much of a public relations circus. They decided to secretly go in and remove every part they had used on every airplane that had parts from 401. It must have worked as planned, because since 1974, there has never been another sighting of the ghost crew of Flight 401. Are they at peace and finally passed over to the other side and enjoying the afterlife? I hope so. Kind of makes you think twice before buying parts off anything that's had a death in it, doesn't it? Have you ever seen a ghost or experienced anything like this? We'd love to hear about it below. Like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, y'all!